Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. Today we're going to look at conditional sentences. They're sentences that use if. If you listen carefully, you'll be able to hear Dr. Malcolm Simons talking about junk DNA, the parts of DNA that people used to think were just rubbish. Listen to the different types of sentences he uses.
Under Darwinistic notions, you would think that junk would drop off under the theory of natural selection, just like species drop off if they hit ecological niches, which is incompatible with survival. If they can adapt to those niches, then those that can survive and those that can't die, is the notion. If you apply that to the DNA sequence, then the coding region genes which survive have a function. And by the way, the non-coding sequences have survived as well. So the proposition would have to be that if they're there, they've got a function.
In listening to Dr. Simons, you can hear that he uses a variety of sentences. This makes for much more interesting language. You should practice using sentences of different lengths and types, especially complex sentences. Today we're going to look at one of the ways you can create complex sentences using an if clause. An if clause is a phrase that gives a condition that's necessary for something else to happen. They're often called conditional clauses. If means when, provided that, or on condition that. There are a few basic patterns for the if clause. Listen to this.
If they can adapt to those niches, then those that can survive and those that can't die. So the proposition would have to be that if they're there, they've got a function.
If they can adapt, then those that can survive. The pattern here is if, simple present tense verb, comma, followed by the word then. Then introduces a clause describing the consequences. Look at the second example in the extract. If they are there, they have a function. Notice that the then is left out in this example. Then is optional. He could have said if they are there, then they have a function. Let's look at some more. If you have a university education, then you have more opportunities. But the then is optional. You can leave it out. If you have a university education, you have more opportunities. Notice that this pattern can be reversed. You have more opportunities if you have a university education. We never include then when the pattern is reversed like this. Let's try with the example from the story. If they're there, they have a function. They have a function if they're there. Okay, now here's the second pattern for if sentences. This is for when the suggestion is less definite or less likely. If you had a university education, comma, then you would have more opportunities. The pattern here is if, past tense verb, comma, then, would plus the verb. If you had a university education, then you would have more opportunities. We use this pattern when we're talking about the future and about something that may not be as likely to happen. Compare these two patterns. If you study hard, then you will pass your test. If you studied hard, then you would pass your test. In the first example, it's a bit like making a useful suggestion. The second sentence is less definite and less polite. It suggests that the person doesn't study hard now. So that's two ways of making the conditional tense. How to say that one thing will happen, or might happen, if something else happens. There are other forms of the conditional tense too. If you learn them, then your English will improve. Okay, now we're going to look at ways of making opposites by using prefixes. Listen to Dr. Simons again.
Under Darwinistic notions, you would think that junk would drop off under the theory of natural selection, just like species drop off if they hit ecological niches, which is incompatible with survival. If they can adapt to those niches, then those that can survive and those that can't die, is the notion. If you apply that to the DNA sequence, then the coding region genes which survive have a function. And by the way, the non-coding sequences have survived as well.
In the passage, we heard the words survive and die. They have opposite meanings. To survive means to keep on living, and to die means to stop living. We call words with opposite meanings opposites. Sometimes opposites are formed from the same word stem using prefixes. Two of the prefixes he uses are in and non. Listen.
And by the way, the non-coding sequences have survived as well.
He calls the junk DNA the non-coding sequences. Non-coding means not coding. Notice that we use a hyphen with the non prefix. Non usually forms adjectives. It means not in the group of, so we have non-European, non-Aboriginal, or non-government. Non can also just mean not, giving a negative sense to a word. Non-fiction, non-smoking, and non-stick. The prefix in is used with adjectives as well to make opposites. It forms words like insignificant, not significant, inexpensive, not expensive, intolerant, not tolerant. Another common opposite prefix is un. We can have unfair, unattractive, unusual, unnatural. But un can also be used with verbs. It means that an action is reversed. So we have undo, undress, or unbend. There aren't many rules about what sort of words take these prefixes. You'll have to learn most opposites one by one. A good way to do this is to try to find out the opposite every time you come across a new word. Finally for today, let's have a look at how you can form adjectives from people's names.
Under Darwinistic notions, you would think that junk would drop off under the theory of natural selection.
He says under Darwinistic notions. Darwinistic here is an adjective, but it's got a capital letter. Do you know why? Well, that's because it comes from the name Darwin, referring to Charles Darwin, who developed the theory of natural selection. But it's got two suffixes, ist and ick. The ick suffix forms adjectives that mean belonging to or like. So Darwinistic means like a Darwinist. But a Darwinist? Well, the suffix ist forms adjectives too, but it forms an adjective that describes a type of person with a certain set of beliefs. When ist is added to people's names, it means someone who follows that person or who believes in what they wrote or said. So we can have a Darwinist, someone who believes in Darwin's theories, or a Marxist, someone who follows the writings of Marx, or a Buddhist, someone who follows the teachings of the Buddha. Well, we're out of time for today. Remember to watch out for those opposites and try using if clauses. See you next time. Bye-bye. Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. Today on Study English, we're looking at adjectives. How do you use them? How do you order them? And how do you use them to compare and describe things? First, let's listen to some descriptions about the world under the sea in the Gulf of Carpentaria off the north coast of Australia. It's quite an amazing place.
We know more about the surface of the Moon or the surface of Mars than we do about the seafloor. The seafloor remains the last unexplored frontier. This is because it's covered by this impenetrable ocean layer that we can't see through. The only way we can see the seafloor is using sonar. The largest reef they mapped is about 10 or so kilometres across. It's an oval-shaped feature, so it covers around 100 square kilometres. Because of the fact that they are submerged in 30 metres or so of water, the reefs are very hard to see. No one had realised that the Gulf contained reefs just like the Great Barrier Reef.
Being able to describe things properly is an important communication skill. You need adjectives for descriptions. They usually come before the nouns they are describing. The red car. But when you want to accurately describe something, you often need to use more than one adjective in a row. What if the car is big, red, and made of plastic? We call it the big red plastic car. Notice that the adjectives are usually separated by commas. But why don't we call it the red plastic big car? How do you know which order to put the adjectives in? Well, for native speakers, it's just that it sounds right. But luckily, there are some rules. It's called the Royal Order of Adjectives. Let's have a look at it. First, we have the determiner. That's articles, a, an, the. Numbers, or a word that describes the amount of something. It can also be the owner, the person or thing who the noun belongs to. So determiners can be a, the, many, some, or a name like John's. So we can have a car, many cars, John's car. The second type of adjective is opinion or observation. This tells you something about the quality of the noun. Useful, cheap, ugly, beautiful. Then we have size. For example, enormous, tiny, huge. Followed by age. It could be old, modern, 7-year-old. Then shape. Perhaps oval, circular or flat. A colour, like white, black or blue. Then we have adjectives that describe origin, where the noun is from. For example, Thai, Indonesian, Australian. Followed by material, what the thing is made of, like copper, plastic or wooden. Lastly is the qualifier. This is something that's an integral part of the noun. Examples might be a rocking chair, a wedding ring, an electric oven. There are, of course, a few exceptions to these rules, but it's important that you learn them and practice them whenever you can. Have a look at these words and see if you can turn them into a phrase. Wooden, square, useful, box, lilies. Well, box is the noun, but what comes first? The determiner. Whose box is it? It's Lily's box. So lilies comes first. Then that's followed by the observation. The box is useful. Then the shape. It's square. Then finally the material. It's a wooden box. So we have Lily's useful square wooden box. Good. Now let's listen to some strings of adjectives from the clip.
The seafloor remains the last unexplored frontier. This is because it's covered by this impenetrable ocean layer that we can't see through. The largest reef they mapped is about 10 or so kilometres across.
She calls the seafloor the last unexplored frontier. Let's look at that phrase. Frontier is the noun. The other words are describing the noun. First we have the determiners, the and last. Last expresses a number, so it goes second. Then unexplored. That's an observation. It's a quality of the frontier. Okay, now what about this impenetrable ocean layer? Well, layer is the noun. All the other words are adjectives. This is the determiner. Impenetrable is an observation. It describes a quality of the ocean layer. Ocean here is the qualifier. Almost part of the noun. It's not just a layer, it's an ocean layer. Okay, now you try one. Look at these words. They form a phrase that he used. Largest, reef, the. Well, reef is the noun, so it comes last. The is a determiner, so it comes first. Largest describes the size, so that comes after the. So we have the largest reef. Okay, there's another way adjectives can be used as well. They can stand alone. They describe nouns by following the verb to be. When used in this way, adjectives are complements. Listen to one here.
The Gulf of Carpentaria is very flat and featureless.
The Gulf of Carpentaria is very flat and featureless. In a phrase, this would be the very flat, featureless Gulf of Carpentaria. But used as a complement, the phrase becomes a full sentence. The Gulf of Carpentaria is very flat and featureless. We can take the phrase, the big red plastic car, and turn it into a sentence. The car is big, red and plastic. Notice that the order of adjectives still stays the same. Now let's look at how you go about describing things. It's often necessary to focus on particular features, such as shape, size, dimension, weight, colour or texture. The more you have built up your vocabulary of adjectives, the better your ability to describe things accurately. So you might write up adjective lists according to groups. To describe shapes, we can say circular, triangular, rectangular, spherical, but we just say square. It's also possible to describe something by saying it's like something common. So we can say something is egg-shaped or kidney-shaped. Listen.
The largest reef they mapped is about 10 or so kilometres across. It's an oval-shaped feature, so it covers around 100 square kilometres.
When you're writing, you should always aim to make your descriptions as accurate as you can. But sometimes you can't be exact, and you need to describe something approximately.
The largest reef they mapped is about 10 or so kilometres across. It's an oval-shaped feature, so it covers around 100 square kilometres. Because of the fact that they are submerged in 30 metres or so of water, the reefs are very hard to see.
Dr. Harris uses the words about, around, or so with numbers. About 10 kilometres, around 100 square kilometres, 30 metres or so. Notice that the phrase or so always comes after the number, but the others all come before. You might also hear people say around about. In formal language, we'd probably say approximately. These are all signs that the amount is not exact. And now it's around about time for me to go. I'll see you next time for more Study English. IELTS preparation. I'm Margot Pilatus. If you've been on a flight recently, you will have heard about the danger of sitting still for a long time in an aeroplane. apart from the danger of boredom, that is. The danger is from a condition called deep vein thrombosis, or DVT. Today on Study English, we'll listen to a doctor talk about DVT. Then we'll look at how to talk about things that might happen in the future.
Deep vein thrombosis is where a clot forms in the calf veins and occasionally in the veins of the leg, sometimes in the veins of the pelvis. And this is a great concern because the clot may dislodge, travelling with the flow of blood into the right side of the heart and from there into the lung. When we're travelling on long haul flights, several things happen. First of all, we're stationary. We're not moving our legs, so there's no physiological compression of the calf muscles. Blood tends to sit in the veins and make clot. Number two, the environment is dry. We dehydrate. We may drink some alcohol. We dehydrate even further. Alcohol is a diuretic agent. It results in us actually drying out, and that makes the blood a little bit thicker and stickier. And these factors lead to clotting. Sometimes, perhaps particularly in the economy section of an aeroplane, we may be a little bit cramped and our leg may be slightly compressed on the seat. This could further prevent blood flow back to the heart and trap blood in the leg where clotting may occur.
Dr. Crantock was talking about things that could happen, may happen, or perhaps will happen in the future. Perhaps is an adverb. It's a word like maybe or possibly. It gives a statement the sense that the speaker is not sure if the thing will happen. Perhaps I will means the same as possibly I will or maybe I will. May and could are modal verbs. May has a number of meanings. The most common use is when you are asking permission. May I come in? Yes, you may. But the other use of may is to talk about possibilities in the future. I may come in tomorrow means in the future I will possibly come in, but it's not definite. Could has a number of meanings too. The first is ability. When I was little, I could swim, means when I was young, I was able to swim. But could is also used to express future possibilities. It could rain tomorrow. It's not definite, but it might rain. Dr. Crantock is talking about what can happen sometimes on flights, but it won't definitely happen. Listen again.
Sometimes, perhaps particularly in the economy section of an aeroplane, we may be a little bit cramped and our leg may be slightly compressed on the seat. This could further prevent blood flow back to the heart and trap blood in the leg where clotting may occur.
So for speculating or thinking about what will happen in the future, we can use adverbials like possibly or perhaps. We can use modal verbs like may and could, and we can use phrases like I guess, I imagine, I suspect. So in the clip, he says blood clotting could occur. We can also say blood clotting may occur. Blood clotting will perhaps occur. Blood clotting will possibly occur. I suspect blood clotting will occur. Notice that the adverbials can occur in a number of places in the sentence. Blood clotting will perhaps occur. Perhaps blood clotting will occur. Blood clotting perhaps will occur. Blood clotting will occur, perhaps. Listen to Dr. Crantock and the way he structures his argument. Listen for a topic sentence and for the way he lists the different ideas.
When we're travelling on long haul flights, several things happen. First of all, we're stationary. We're not moving our legs, so there's no physiological compression of the calf muscles. Blood tends to sit in the veins and make clot. Number two, the environment is dry. We dehydrate. We may drink some alcohol. We dehydrate even further. Alcohol is a diuretic agent. It results in us actually drying out, and that makes the blood a little bit thicker and stickier. And these factors lead to clotting.
The first sentence is the topic sentence. He said, when we're travelling on long-haul flights, several things happen. So we know from this topic sentence that he's going to tell us about travelling on long-haul flights. But there are lots of things you can say about travelling on long-haul flights, so he says something else in this sentence that gives us more information. He says, several things happen. This phrase is called the controlling idea. Every topic sentence has a controlling idea. It tells us what the focus of the paragraph will be. So he's going to be discussing several things that happen on long-haul flights. In the rest of the paragraph, he lists some of the things that happen. He raises the points one by one and discusses them in detail.
When we're travelling on long haul flights, several things happen. First of all, we're stationary. We're not moving our legs, so there's no physiological compression of the calf muscles. Blood tends to sit in the veins and make clot. Number two, the environment is dry. We dehydrate. We may drink some alcohol. We dehydrate even further. Alcohol is a diuretic agent. It results in us actually drying out, and that makes the blood a little bit thicker and stickier. And these factors lead to clotting.
Dr. Crantock says, first of all, we're stationary. This is the first factor in his argument. People are stationary or sitting still. He says, number two, the environment is dry. This indicates it is the second factor in his argument. Moving on through the argument, you can keep discussing factors by using transition signals, such as another factor is, in addition or additionally, furthermore, above all. You could also use next, but this is quite informal as well. The last reason or item in the list could be introduced by lastly or finally. It's good practice to watch out for these transition devices when listening to someone talk. They'll help you to follow an argument more clearly. Finally for today, let's look at some definitions. Dr. Crantock gives a definition of the condition he is talking about because it's an unusual medical term.
Deep vein thrombosis is where a clot forms in the calf veins and occasionally in the veins of the leg, sometimes in the veins of the pelvis.
He says, deep vein thrombosis is where a clot forms in the calf veins. This is a common pattern for giving a definition. First, name the thing being defined. In this case, it's deep vein thrombosis. Secondly, use the verb to be, is or are. Here we'd say deep vein thrombosis is. Thirdly, we can write the class. What kind of thing is it? In this case, DVT is a medical condition. So we might have deep vein thrombosis is a condition. Next, we use a word like which, who, where, or that. Deep vein thrombosis is a condition where. And finally, we give the characteristics of the thing. This could be a physical description or a description of behaviour. In the case of a medical condition, this would most commonly be the symptoms or effects of the condition. Deep vein thrombosis is a condition where blood clots form in the veins. Let's try a couple of examples. What is a computer? It stores and processes information. A computer is a machine that stores and processes information. What is an accountant? Well, we have the phrase analyses and deals with finances. An accountant is a person who analyses and deals with finances. And what is the time? The time is something that we have run out of for today. See you next time. I'm Margot Politis. Today on Study English, we're going to look at some of the features of formal written English. In our clip, we'll hear from a man who believes that drinking water is the key to being healthy and living a long time. He's going to talk about how he came to his conclusion and how he tried to get some support for his project.
How does nature do it? What keeps body cells going? And how can we improve on that process so that we eliminate disease altogether and we live a long and healthy life? I don't think death and disease is inevitable. We stumbled on the fact that they weren't actually getting rid of carbon dioxide out of their bodies, they were neutralising the carbon dioxide in their bodies. And we found it was from the water they were drinking. When we looked at these animals and saw what they were doing, it was exactly as we'd hypothesised, and that was a great feeling, a real feeling of elation. I tried and I tried and I tried to be conventional in that sense. I went to 100 people. I wrote 1,000 letters. I spoke to the Australian Academy of Science. I spoke to the American Academy of Science. I spoke to hospitals. I spoke to professors of medicine. Because I wanted to do work independently, I couldn't get anywhere, so I had to do it other ways. This is a food substance. This is something that's been drunk for thousands of years. This is probably where the mythology of the Fountain of Youth came from. There would have been natural springs somewhere bubbling out magnesium bicarbonate at an alkaline pH value, and people that drank these springs lived longer. But I want everybody to have the opportunity to live a long and healthy life, and that's been my life's work, and we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere.
One of the most important areas for students to master is the difference between informal spoken English and formal written English, including academic language. There are many differences between formal and informal English. Firstly, in written language, all words must be spelt correctly. There should be no words in written English that you can't find in a dictionary. Another important difference is that contractions are not used in formal written English. We only use contractions in written English if we're trying to represent the way that people speak. The clip we've heard today is, of course, spoken English. Listen to part of it again and see if you can identify the features of informal English.
But I want everybody to have the opportunity to live a long and healthy life, and that's been my life's work, and we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere.
When Dr. Beckett is speaking, he uses a number of contractions. He says, "That's been my life's work," and "We're getting somewhere." "That's" is short for "that is," and "where" is short for "we are." So if we were writing these statements, we'd write, "That has been my life's work. We are getting somewhere." There are many common contractions. By using them in your spoken language, you'll sound more natural, but be careful to write them out in full informal situations. Watch for not words like couldn't, could not, wouldn't, would not, shouldn't, should not, won't, will not, and don't, do not. Another common feature of informal English is the use of phrasal verbs, or two-word verbs. Phrasal verbs consist of a verb and a preposition. They are commonly used in spoken English, and their meanings are idiomatic, giving the verb a special new meaning. Listen for some phrasal verbs in this clip.
We stumbled on the fact that they weren't actually getting rid of carbon dioxide out of their bodies, they were neutralising the carbon dioxide in their bodies. And we found it was from the water they were drinking. This is probably where the mythology of the Fountain of Youth came from.
He uses the phrasal verbs stumbled on, get rid of, found out, and came from. In formal written English, it's best to use single word verbs. So instead of saying they weren't getting rid of carbon dioxide, we would write they weren't eliminating carbon dioxide. And then we'd get rid of the contraction. So it would read, they were not eliminating carbon dioxide. Instead of saying we found out it was from the water, we would write we discovered it was from the water. This is probably where the myth came from. This is probably where the myth originated. Let's look at some other examples of common phrasal verbs. Instead of look into, we would write investigate. Instead of cut down, we would write reduce. Keep on could be continue. Point out could be indicate. All of these words are more formal than phrasal verbs. Another important part of formal written English is understanding how to use conjunctions. Short sentences are less formal than compound or complex sentences. If you can, it's good to try to link short sentences together. Listen to this clip, then we'll try to turn it into good formal English using coordinating conjunctions.
I went to 100 people. I wrote 1,000 letters. I spoke to the Australian Academy of Science. I spoke to the American Academy of Science. I spoke to hospitals. I spoke to professors of medicine. Because I wanted to do work independently, I couldn't get anywhere.
He uses a number of simple sentences in a row. I spoke to the Australian Academy of Science. I spoke to the American Academy of Science. I spoke to hospitals. I spoke to professors of medicine. These could become, I spoke to the Australian Academy of Science, comma, the American Academy of Science, and hospitals. I also spoke to professors of medicine. There are some rules to be aware of when you're using conjunctions. In formal English, we don't start sentences with coordinating conjunctions. Words like and but are joining words. They are not used to begin sentences. Listen to Dr. Beckett again. Notice how he uses conjunctions to start his sentences.
There would have been natural springs somewhere bubbling out magnesium bicarbonate at an alkaline pH value, and people that drank these springs lived longer. But I want everybody to have the opportunity to live a long and healthy life, and that's been my life's work.
He uses the word and to begin a sentence. If we were writing a formal report or essay, we would have to find other words to replace and. We could begin the sentence with furthermore, in addition, or moreover. We could replace the word but with the word however. You should make lists of these alternative words so you use a variety of them in your written language. It's important to avoid repetition in your formal written English. Of course, repetition can be used to add emphasis in spoken English. You might hear people say things like, I really, really like that. But in formal academic writing, you should find other ways of adding emphasis. Listen to the way he uses repetition.
I tried and I tried and I tried to be conventional in that sense. I went to 100 people. I wrote 1,000 letters. I spoke to the Australian Academy of Science. I spoke to the American Academy of Science. I spoke to hospitals. I spoke to professors of medicine. Because I wanted to do work independently, I couldn't get anywhere.
I tried and I tried and I tried. To make this sentence more formal, you could either just drop the repeated verb or use an adverb like repeatedly. We could just write, I tried, or I tried repeatedly. Another way you can make your language more formal is to use the prefix re to indicate a repeated action. This doesn't apply to all verbs. Look at this sentence. He played and played the song again and again. We could write formally, he replayed the song repeatedly. And why don't you try practicing ways of making spoken language more formal? Or looking at ways that you can take formal written language and turn it into conversational English. That's all for today. I hope I'll see you next time on Study English. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Today we're going to see a clip about a process called salinity. That's where land becomes damaged by too much salt. We'll be looking at language you can use to describe processes, including transition signals. Listen for how the process of salinity is described here.
One of the main causes of salinity is waterlogging. First, land is cleared for crops to grow. Now, instead of trees pumping the water out of the ground and keeping the salt stored, whatever water the crops don't use percolates down into the soil. Gradually, over a number of years, the earth gets wetter and wetter, and eventually it waterlogs. Then the water table starts to rise to the surface. As it rises, it dissolves the tons of salt stored in the soil. Once the water table comes to within 2 metres of the surface, it begins to evaporate. Lastly, the sun extracts the moisture from the ground, leaving the salt concentrated on the surface. The first casualties of this dramatic land change and the dry land salinity that it causes are ecosystems.
We heard a description of a process. A process has a number of steps from beginning to end. When describing a process, the first sentence or topic sentence should tell us what the main idea of the paragraph is and what the process is leading to. Listen to the topic sentence.
One of the main causes of salinity is waterlogging.
One of the main causes of salinity is waterlogging. This topic sentence tells us that the paragraph is about salinity, that is, land becoming salty. And the sentence tells us that one of the main causes of this problem is waterlogging. So from this sentence, we expect that the paragraph will be about the process of land becoming waterlogged, leading to salinity. When we describe a process, it is important that the reader understands when each part of the process happens, what order things happen in. Listen again to the passage and watch for the words that order the stages of the process.
First, land is cleared for crops to grow. Now, instead of trees pumping the water out of the ground and keeping the salt stored, whatever water the crops don't use percolates down into the soil. Gradually, over a number of years, the earth gets wetter and wetter, and eventually it waterlogs. Then the water table starts to rise to the surface. As it rises, it dissolves the tons of salt stored in the soil. Once the water table comes to within 2 metres of the surface, it begins to evaporate. Lastly, the sun extracts the moisture from the ground, leaving the salt concentrated on the surface.
She uses a range of transition signals to order the stages of the process. One type of transition signal is ordinal numbers. Listen.
One of the main causes of salinity is waterlogging. First, land is cleared for crops to grow.
The ordinal numbers are first, second, third, fourth, and so on. These ordinal numbers can be used as adjectives to form phrases describing order. We can either just start the sentence with first, comma, second, comma, or we can use them in phrases like these. The first step is. The second stage begins when. The third part is. We can also add ly to ordinal numbers to make adverbs. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, etc. Using these words is a very common and simple way of ordering stages in a process. You can also use them to organise any group of ideas, examples or points in an argument. Another type of transition signal she uses is time phrases.
Gradually, over a number of years, the earth gets wetter and wetter.
Gradually, over a number of years, the earth gets wetter and wetter. The phrase gradually, comma, over a number of years, comma, tells us that this part of the process takes place gradually, slowly, over a number of years, over many years. It is a long, slow process. Over a number of years is a time phrase. Using time phrases helps to make the descriptions of processes clearer. Other useful time phrases you might come across are at this stage, during this process, after several days. All of these phrases tell us when or for how long that stage in the process takes place. Listen again.
Then the water table starts to rise to the surface. As it rises, it dissolves the tons of salt stored in the soil.
She says, as it rises. The word as tells us that two actions are taking place together or simultaneously. While the water table is rising to the surface, it dissolves the salt. Other phrases indicating two actions taking place at the same time could be at the same time, meanwhile. There are some other adverbs you can use as transition signals. Which ones were used in the passage? Listen.
Now, instead of trees pumping the water out of the ground and keeping the salt stored, whatever water the crops don't use percolates down into the soil. Gradually, over a number of years, the earth gets wetter and wetter, and eventually it waterlogs. Then the water table starts to rise to the surface. As it rises, it dissolves the tons of salt stored in the soil.
She uses the adverbs now, eventually, then, and lastly. These all help to order events. There are many other adverbs to choose from. Make sure you use a wide variety of them in your writing and speaking, rather than just repeating the same ones. Others include finally, subsequently, later, afterwards. Okay, we're going to finish today by looking at some pronunciation. There are a number of English words that can be used as both nouns and verbs. However, in many cases, the pronunciation of these changes. This can be quite difficult to get used to. Listen to the word extracts in the passage.
Lastly, the sun extracts the moisture from the ground, leaving the salt concentrated on the surface.
The sun extracts the moisture. Extracts here comes from the verb to extract. Where is the emphasis or stress in this word? It's on the second syllable, extract. But E-X-T-R-A-C-T is also a noun. When it's a noun, it's pronounced extract. The emphasis is now on the first syllable. And this pattern of first syllable emphasis for the noun form and second syllable emphasis for the verb form is repeated with other words. We have to extract and an extract, to contract and a contract, to construct and a construct. And there are lots of others. We have produce, that you eat, and to produce, to make. We have subject and object, but subject and object. Let's test you. Try reading these sentences. He objected to the subject of the lesson. The farm produced fresh produce. So you can see how the stress in words can change meaning. You'll have to practice whenever you can. And after all that, it must be time to go. See you next time on Study English. Today we're going to listen to a weather report. We're going to listen for numbers and practice saying and spelling them. Listen to the weather in Sydney.
Good morning. It looks like being another glorious summer day in Sydney. Temperatures will range from a minimum of 16 degrees in Richmond and 17 degrees in the city, with maximum temperatures reaching the high 20s, with 29 in Richmond and 27 in the city by early afternoon. This summer promises to be the warmest since 1987. The average minimum for this time of the year is 15 degrees Celsius and the average maximum is 22. Humidity will be high again today, ranging from 80 to 90% across the metropolitan area and possibly for the next 5 or 6 days. Sunrise will be at 5:45 a.m. and the sun will set at 7:43 p.m. The next full moon will be on December the 9th. For those interested in fishing and surfing, windy conditions will prevail all day, with winds gusting from the southeast from 10 to 15 knots, then easing to 10 to 11 knots by late afternoon. Swells along all Sydney beaches will range from 1 to 1.5 metres.
So counting and numbers are a very important part of language. You need them to talk about how much things cost, what you earn, telephone numbers, visa cards, passports, addresses and dates. Being able to listen for and understand numbers is an important academic skill. There are some conventions you need to learn, and you'll need to do a lot of practice listening for and saying numbers. Let's get started. Listen to these pairs of numbers. 13, 30, 14, 40, 15, 50, 16, 60. Now you try these ones. 17, 70, 18, 80, 19, 90. They sound very similar. You'll need to listen carefully so that you don't get these mixed up.
Temperatures will range from a minimum of 16 degrees in Richmond and 17 degrees in the city. Humidity will be high again today, ranging from 80 to 90% across the metropolitan area.
The temperature in Richmond is 16 degrees Celsius. The humidity is 80 to 90%. Did you hear these numbers correctly? If you don't understand what someone said, ask them to repeat and stress the key syllable.
And that will be $16.
Did you say 16 or 60? Usually the first syllable in a number is stressed. 16, 60. Notice that it's the final N in teen that you have to be careful with. Teen, T. But of course when you're listening for numbers, you can often work out the correct amount by the context. Try to always be aware of what seems right, even if you didn't quite hear properly. Pronunciation of years can sometimes be difficult as well. Listen to the clip.
This summer promises to be the warmest since 1987.
1987. 1987. Notice where the stress comes. 1999. Let's practice some more. 2001. 1932. 2040. Or perhaps this will be read as 2040. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Notice 40 is spelt F-O-R-T-Y, not like 4 and 14. Okay, now let's look at temperatures.
Temperatures will range from a minimum of 16 degrees in Richmond and 17 degrees in the city.
Temperatures will range from 16 degrees Celsius. We write that as 16 degrees Celsius with a capital C. If it was in Fahrenheit, we'd write 16 degrees Fahrenheit with a capital F. But in Australia, we use Celsius. So when giving a temperature range, it's written 16 to 17 degrees Celsius or 16 to 17 degrees Celsius. These are both read out the same way. Notice that the 2 is unstressed. 16 to 17 degrees Celsius. Now we're going to listen to a different weather report. Look at it written and see if you can work out what should be written in the blanks.
Here is the weather report for Sydney today, Tuesday the 14th of November. The sun will rise at 5:15 and set at 6:45. The minimum temperature for metropolitan Sydney will be 13, rising to a maximum of 30 degrees Celsius. Humidity today promises to be high at 70 to 80%.
Okay, let's have a look at that. The weather report for Sydney today, Tuesday the 14th of November. She said Tuesday the 14th of November. The sun will rise at 5:15 and set at 6:45. The minimum temperature for metropolitan Sydney will be 13, rising to a maximum of 30 degrees Celsius. Humidity today promises to be high, 70 to 80%. How did you go with that? Remember, pronouncing final consonants will help considerably in hearing and understanding numbers. This is very important so that listeners understand what you say. Listen to the pronunciation of numbers here.
Humidity will be high again today, ranging from 80 to 90% across the metropolitan area and possibly for the next 5 or 6 days.
She says 5 or 6 days. By linking final consonants with the first vowels of the following word, your speech will sound more natural. We say 5 or 6, 7 and 8, 9 or 10. Okay, now let's listen for some times.
Sunrise will be at 5:45 a.m. and the sun will set at 7:43 p.m. The next full moon will be on December the 9th.
She says sunrise will be at 5:45 a.m. Sunset will be at 7:43 p.m. Notice the way we say the time. We say the hour and then the minutes as a whole number. And we add a.m. for morning, p.m. for afternoon. 5:45 a.m., 7:43 p.m. But there are a number of different ways of saying the quarter hours. We have 7 a.m. or 7 o'clock, 7:15 or quarter past 7, 7:45 or quarter to 8, 7:30, half past 7. Now let's listen to some more of the weather report.
For those interested in fishing and surfing, windy conditions will prevail all day with winds gusting from the southeast from 10 to 15 knots, then easing to 10 to 11 knots by late afternoon.
Notice that she says, for those interested in fishing and swimming. Interested here is a past participle, but it's used as an adjective. English verbs have two sorts of participles, present and past. So the regular verb to interest has interesting, interested. Bore, boring, bored. Tire, tiring, tired. Excite, exciting, excited. When we want to say how we feel about something, we can use the past participle. I am interested in science. I am bored with reading. I felt tired after that walk. But when we're describing the qualities of a person or thing, we use the present participle. Science is interesting. A good way to remember these is to make sure you always write a table with the past and present participles together. You'll notice that the present participle usually ends in ing, and the past participle ends in ed. But of course there are always irregular verbs to watch out for as well. And that's all for Study English today. Hope you keep practicing those interesting participles. They should keep you interested. See you next time. Bye-bye. Today on Study English, it's geography. How do we talk about places, locations and directions? Listen to this clip about the history and geography of the Torres Strait.
The Torres Strait is situated above Queensland, between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea. Darnley Island, also known as Erub, is the largest volcanic island in the eastern Torres Strait, with a population of around 375. It is surrounded by some of the deepest water in the world, known as the Darnley Deep. Though we are a seafaring people, 75% of Torres Strait Islanders today are living on the mainland. This is because we were displaced from our island homes since colonisation. Life for Torres Strait Islanders has been an endurance test ever since colonisation. During the Second World War, hundreds of Torres Strait Islander men were shipped off from their homes to fight for their country, of which they were still not citizens. Uncle Bill Saylor, who has gone back to live on his land of Erub, remembers all too well the war.
So that was Johnny Harding talking about his home, the Torres Strait Islands. When we want to talk about a place or where something is in relation to other places, we need to use function words called prepositions. Some common prepositions include in, on, near, or between. Prepositions can also be made up of 2 or even 3 words. For example, next to, surrounded by, or in front of. These are called prepositions of place. Listen for the prepositions of place in this clip.
The Torres Strait is situated above Queensland, between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea.
Now let's go back over the clip and see if we can figure out where the Torres Strait is. Johnny says that the Torres Strait is situated above Queensland. Here's Queensland. The islands are situated above Queensland and between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea. So the Torres Strait Islands can be found here.
The Torres Strait is situated above Queensland, between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea.
Learning to use prepositions correctly can be difficult because most of them have more than one function. There are not many rules to help you choose correctly, so you need to learn each expression separately. Look at the use of prepositions in the following. Meet me at the front door of the department store in George Street on the corner. In English, we say at a location, in the street, but on the corner. The general rule is that we use in to talk about large areas. For example, I live in an apartment block in Sydney, in Australia. Use at for particular locations. I live at number 2 West Street. Use on to say things like, my house is on the corner, or I live on the 2nd floor. And here's a quick exercise on prepositions. Try describing the position of things in the picture. Choose from in, on, near, between, above, next to, in front of. The chair is the table. The chair is in front of the table. The orange is the bowl. The orange is in the bowl. The cup is the vase and the book. The cup is between the vase and the book. And why don't you try more of these exercises at home? Listen for some more prepositions.
Darnley Island, also known as Erub, is the largest volcanic island in the eastern Torres Strait, with a population of around 375. It is surrounded by some of the deepest water in the world, known as the Darnley Deep. Though we are a seafaring people, 75% of Torres Strait Islanders today are living on the mainland. This is because we were displaced from our island homes since colonisation.
Okay, so we can use spoken and written descriptions to talk about a number of different subject areas. In social settings, we can describe people, family, or relationships. In physical settings, we can describe geography, landscapes, and other places. But whatever you're describing, it's important to organise and structure your language. You need to carefully plan what you're going to say and the order you want to say it in. If you're describing a country, it's helpful to list the features you want to concentrate on. They might include the location and size of the country, the physical features, the climate, and even the population and language of the people. Listen to all the information in the clip about Torres Strait. Can you hear what type of information the speaker is giving us?
The Torres Strait is situated above Queensland, between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea. Darnley Island, also known as Erub, is the largest volcanic island in the eastern Torres Strait, with a population of around 375. It is surrounded by some of the deepest water in the world, known as the Darnley Deep. Though we are a seafaring people, 75% of Torres Strait Islanders today are living on the mainland.
We heard information about the location and physical features of the islands, as well as about the population. He could have included information about the economy, customs, festivals, or food. There are many choices. If you're writing about a place, the first step is to decide which features you want to describe. The next step is to organise the description. When writing about a place, punctuation is another important tool to help organise your writing and give it meaning. The rules for punctuation are different in all languages, and knowing which letters to capitalise is a key part of punctuation. The rules about which words to capitalise need to be learnt. Let's review some of these rules, and then we'll go back to the clip and look at how some of these rules apply. We always capitalise the first word in a sentence, the pronoun I, specific places on a map, for example, the Torres Strait or Australia, names of people or nationalities like Torres Strait Islanders or Australians, periods of time like the Second World War, and the names of people, including their title, for example, Uncle Bill Sailor. Compass points are not capitalised unless they form part of a formal name for an area. So the Eastern Torres Strait doesn't need a capital on the compass point, but Southeast Asia does. Let's take another look at the clip, focusing on the use of capitals.
The Torres Strait is situated above Queensland, between the Arafura Sea and the Coral Sea, Cape York Peninsula and Papua New Guinea. Darnley Island, also known as Erub, is the largest volcanic island in the Eastern Torres Strait, with a population of around 375. Life for Torres Strait Islanders has been an endurance test ever since colonisation. During the Second World War, hundreds of Torres Strait Islander men were shipped off from their homes to fight for their country, of which they were still not citizens. Uncle Bill Sailor, who has gone back to live on his land of Erub, remembers all too well the war.
Remember, if you're not sure which words to capitalise, check the dictionary. And that's all for today. Don't forget to practice organising and structuring your written language. And always edit your writing to make sure all your capitals and other punctuation are right. I look forward to seeing you next time on Study English. Bye-bye. Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. Today we're going to look at the continuous tense, and then we're going to practice some sentence stress. Our clip today is of a birdwatcher named Margaret. A birdwatcher is someone who loves watching and listening to birds. Let's start by listening to Margaret talk about watching birds.
Some people think it's a bit of a strange pleasure, but, it's always interesting. It's interesting to see what they're doing. We saw them sheltering under the banks as we came around and so on. And they have to live in it, so why shouldn't we? What I'm doing is looking to see what's outside this hive, because I'm doing a sheet for the bird atlas of a radius of 500 metres from here to see all the species that are in it. I use my binoculars and I'm using a telescope, and I use my ears because I was recording birds by call as I walk down the track here, wrens and little grass birds and stuff. And in fact, if you do a lot of bird watching in the bush, you do a lot by call. Day like today is not much good, but normally you do a lot by call. And the idea is to make sure you get all the species that are here in the area that you're surveying.
Margaret is talking about the time she spends watching birds. When describing actions that happen for a continuous period of time, we need to use a continuous tense. In English, there are several continuous tenses. Continuous tenses are formed by using the verb to be plus the present participle, the ing or ing form of the verb. Today we're going to look at the present and past continuous tenses. Let's begin with the present continuous tense. The present continuous tense describes things that are in progress or are happening. Listen to Margaret again and see if you can hear some examples of the present continuous tense.
What I'm doing is looking to see what's outside this hive, because I'm doing a sheet for the bird atlas of a radius of 500 metres from here to see all the species that are in it. I use my binoculars and I'm using a telescope.
Margaret uses the phrases I'm doing and I'm using to describe things that are happening now. We can use the present continuous tense in three ways. Firstly, we use it to describe actions that are happening now. For example, Margaret says, I'm using a telescope. We also use this tense to refer to actions that are happening soon. This is the future aspect. Thirdly, the continuous tense can describe actions that are happening simultaneously or at the same time. In this case, the continuous tense follows the words when, while, or as. Listen to the following sentences and see if you can identify which of these three rules is being used. I'm going birdwatching today. What are you doing? This is an example of Rule 2. Here, we use the present continuous tense to talk about things that are happening soon. The birds are singing while they are flying. This is an example of Rule 3. because we are describing two things that are happening at the same time, singing and flying. It's a good idea to practice recognising these. But now, let's take a look at the past continuous tense.
And I use my ears because I was recording birds by call as I walked down the track here, wrens and little grass birds and stuff. In fact, if you do a lot of bird watching in the bush, you do a lot by call. A day like today is not much good, but normally you do a lot by call. And the idea is to make sure you get all the species that are here in the area that you're surveying.
Margaret says that she was recording birds as she walked down the track. This is the past continuous tense. We can use it in two situations. Can you identify which one applies to Margaret? We use it to describe an action that was in progress at a specific time in the past, or to describe a continuous action that was interrupted by something else. So when Margaret says, "I was recording birds as I walked down the track," she is using Rule 1. She is talking about a continuous action that she was doing in the past. Here's another sentence. "I was walking down the track when the rain started." This is Rule 2. Walking down the track was interrupted by the rain. Notice that the second clause is introduced by the word when the rain started. Words like as, when, or while are often used to begin the second clause. And the second clause takes the simple past tense. Look at our sentences again. I was recording birds as I walked down the track. I was walking down the track when the rain started. Okay, now let's have a look back at the clip. This time we'll highlight all the present and past continuous tenses.
Some people think it's a bit of a strange pleasure, but it's always interesting. It's interesting to see what they're doing. We saw them sheltering under the banks as we came around and so on, and they have to live in it, so why shouldn't we? I'm doing a sheet for the bird atlas of a radius of 500 metres from here to see all the species that are in it. I use my binoculars and I'm using the telescope, and I use my ears because I was recording birds by call as I walked down the track here, wrens and little grass birds and stuff. In fact, if you do a lot of bird watching in the bush, you do a lot by call. A day like today is not much good, but normally you do a lot by call. And the idea is to make sure you get all the species that are here in the area that you're surveying.
Today's clip is about bird watching. We've seen that the ing can be used for continuous tenses, but ing words can have lots of other uses too. Ing forms the present participle of a verb. Some ing words can also be adjectives, and they can act as gerunds. A gerund is a verb that acts as a noun. Let's look at an example. Here's the sentence, I love swimming. The word swimming is the present participle of the verb to swim. But in this sentence, swimming is a noun. So the word swimming is called a gerund. Listen for a gerund in the clip.
In fact, if you do a lot of bird watching in the bush, you do a lot by call.
Bird watching. Watching is a gerund. It's a verb that's used as a noun. There are many phrases that use gerunds with the verb to go. They are mainly used with recreational activities or things you do for fun. For example, we say, go swimming, go bird watching, go dancing. On the weekend, I usually go swimming. This weekend, I'd like to go dancing. Finally today, we're going to look at some sentence stress and rhythm. When we talk about rhythm in English, we mean the beat of the language. The beat of the language comes from the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables or words in a sentence. Some words usually have a strong stress. These are content words, the nouns, verbs, adjectives and adverbs. They're usually strongly stressed and carry the rhythm. Then there are the words that have a weak stress. These are usually the articles, pronouns, prepositions and conjunctions. They're spoken quickly between the strongly stressed words. As well as the different stress on words, the number of pauses you make in your speech will affect the rhythm of your language. It helps listeners tell what is important and what is secondary information. You should practice reading using different beats and see how this affects the meaning. Notice how I can read the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Here, the words I'm stressing are the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. The less important words are squeezed in between the beats. The more squeezed in, the shorter they become. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. 1 and then a 2 and then a 3 and then a 4. And that's all for Study English today. Make sure that you listen out for the rhythm of people's speech. Copying native speakers is the best way to learn the stress and the beat. And I'll see you next time on Study English. Welcome to another episode of Study English IELTS Preparation. Today we're going to listen to a finance report. It's filled with numbers and amounts expressed in a variety of ways. It's important to be able to understand and describe numerical data using decimals, fractions and currencies. Listen to the day's finance report.
The Australian dollar today, Tuesday the 11th of November, continues to rise against the US dollar, buying just over 70 cents, a 15-year high. Against other currencies, however, the trend is a little different, falling against the pound, closing at 0.425, a slight drop on yesterday, and 0.61 euros. The yen is also strengthening at 71.95 and considerably higher against the greenback at 111.03 yen. The Dow Jones Index closed today at 9,809.79, a fall of 47.18 on yesterday's trading. The Sydney stock market doubled its trading yesterday, with BHP Billiton trading heavily. The latest retail figures showed that turnover grew by 3.2% in the June quarter, the fastest quarterly growth rate for 5.5 years. At the same time, unemployment fell to its lowest level in 12.5 years.
Okay, first we're going to look at decimals and how you express them. Listen carefully again.
Against other currencies, however, the trend is a little different, falling against the pound, closing at 0.425, a slight drop on yesterday, and 0.61 euros. The yen is also strengthening at 71.95 and considerably higher against the greenback at 111.03 yen. The Dow Jones Index closed today at 9,809.79, a fall of 47.18 on yesterday's trading.
In English, decimals are written with a point, not a comma. So we write 4.25, 6.1. When you say the numbers after the decimal point, you say them all separately as individual numbers. So we have 71.95, 47.18, 9,809.79. Notice that a 0 is often spoken as O. Practice saying these numbers. 326.01, 4.897, 902.308. Listen again.
Against other currencies, however, the trend is a little different, falling against the pound, closing at 0.425, a slight drop on yesterday, and 0.61 euros. The yen is also strengthening at 71.95 and considerably higher against the greenback at 111.03 yen. The Dow Jones Index closed today at 9,809.79, a fall of 47.18 on yesterday's trading. The Sydney stock market doubled its trading yesterday, with BHP Billiton trading heavily.
You can hear that when using numbers, there are often alternatives and many choices you can make. So, conversationally, we would usually say 111.03, but you will also often hear 111.03. Here, we could say 0.425, 0.425, or even just 0.425. Notice that in North America, people usually say 0, not 0 or O. Okay, now the other way of expressing numbers less than 1 is using fractions. Listen to the fractions here.
The latest retail figures showed that turnover grew by 3.2% in the June quarter, the fastest quarterly growth rate for 5.5 years. At the same time, unemployment fell to its lowest level in 12.5 years.
She uses the most common fraction, a half. Listen to how we say common fractions. A half, a third, a quarter, 2/3, 5/8, 3/4. Notice that once you understand the pattern, you can express any fraction you want. Try these. 7/18, 16/30, 14/40. Okay, now listen again to some of the report. Listen for different currencies.
Against other currencies, however, the trend is a little different, falling against the pound, closing at 0.425, a slight drop on yesterday, and 0.61 euros. The yen is also strengthening at 71.95 and considerably higher against the greenback at 111.03 yen.
There were a number of different currencies mentioned in that clip. The pound, the euro, the yen, the greenback. Let's have a look at them. Lots of countries use a dollar. In Australia, the Australian dollar is usually expressed with the dollar sign. But internationally, it's written like this, AUD. We read this, the Australian dollar. In the United States, they use the dollar as well. It's the USD, the United States dollar. But it's often called the greenback because it's green. In Great Britain, they use the pound. It's written GBP, but it's often called the pound sterling. In the European Union, they use the euro dollar, written like this, EUR. In Japan, it's the yen, written JPY. In China, it's the yuan, written CNY, and the renminbi, RMB. Notice that we write the currency before the number, but we say it after the number. So we read $2, or £4.15. Notice also how we read longer numbers: 3,470 Japanese yen, 192 Australian dollars. Notice that when spoken naturally, the one often becomes a, and the and becomes squashed. We don't say 192, but 192. Try this one. 127,322 Hong Kong dollars. Okay, now let's listen to the report again, and then we'll look at another important use of numbers.
The Australian dollar today, Tuesday the 11th of November, continues to rise against the US dollar, buying just over 70 cents, a 15-year high.
Notice that she says Tuesday the 11th of November. Saying simple things like the date can be confusing in English, as the way they're said varies. In Australia, we say the 11th of November, or November the 11th. Notice that it's written without the words the or of. For the 13th of February 2005, Australians would write this: 13.02.2005. But in North America, they'd write it 02.13.2005. You'll need to learn these to make sure you don't turn up somewhere on the wrong day. So remember that in Australia, we write the date day.month.year, but in North America, they write month.day.year. And there is even an international standard that says the format should be year.month.day. With numbers, dates and times, there are all sorts of variations. Just make sure you understand the currency, the time and the date, or you could find yourself in all sorts of trouble. And I'll see you soon for more Study English. Bye-bye. I'm Margot Politis. Today we're going to talk about how to describe the appearance or character of animals and people. Here's the clip. Listen to some descriptions of a very strange octopus.
You couldn't get an animal that is sort of more different or more alien to us. They've got such a weird shape. They've got 8 arms coming off their mouth. When they walk around, it's like they're running round on super lips. They've got a head in the middle of their body. They've got a donut-shaped brain. They've got 3 hearts, blue blood and jet propulsion. And they've got a bag on the back that they stick all the body bits in. So octopuses have weird forms, and they have lots of really unusual behaviours as well, like high speeds and camouflaging. I think the reason that octopuses have ended up having such weird forms and all these different sorts of behaviours is because they're a really good meal. They have no bones, no armour, no poison and no spines. They're popular prey, so they have to be very fast and clever at squeezing through tiny holes and really good at hiding from animals that want to eat them. So having to get away from their predators in the sea has made them evolve into amazing creatures.
So they certainly are very strange creatures. Let's begin today by talking about how we order descriptions. When you write something down, you will have already thought about what you want to say. The next step is to decide how you want to structure your description. Today's description of an octopus starts with an interesting statement telling us how strange and unusual the octopus is compared to humans. This is to attract the attention of the reader or the listener. Let's listen.
You couldn't get an animal that is sort of more different or more alien to us. They've got such a weird shape.
Then the description focuses on the appearance of octopuses, the way they look. They have a weird shape. Which of the octopus's characteristics is described next?
So octopuses have weird forms, and they have lots of really unusual behaviours as well, like high speeds and camouflaging.
He talks about the behaviours of the octopus. So he begins by talking about the way an octopus looks, and then he talks about its behaviours, the way it acts. There are many other headings we could use to organise a description of something. For example, if you want to describe a person, you might think about their age, height, hair, eyes, face, skin, or other features. For example, how would you describe this person? She has brown hair and brown eyes. Her face is long and narrow. Her skin is tanned. We could also say that she is of average height and has a slim build. You might even want to guess how tall she is. In Australia, we use centimetres to measure height, but many people still use feet and inches to describe height. So we might say she is 5 feet 6 inches, or 167 centimetres tall. Have a look at these pictures. Which person has brown hair, blue eyes, a round face and freckles? Well, they both do. Which person is a teenager with long, straight hair and big eyes? Which person is middle-aged with frizzy hair and glasses? You can see that the same person can be described in different ways, depending on what you want to focus on. The more vocabulary you know, the better your descriptions will be. Now, listen for another way of describing a person or animal.
They've got a head in the middle of their body, they've got a donut-shaped brain, they've got 3 hearts, blue blood and jet propulsion.
The octopus has a donut-shaped brain. There's not many people you could say that about. But when describing things, it can be useful to compare something with a common shape. So a person might have an oval-shaped face, almond-shaped eyes, and a pear-shaped body, like this. But what if you don't want to describe the way a person looks? You might want to describe someone's personality or character. Let's hear more about the octopus.
They're popular prey, so they have to be very fast and clever at squeezing through tiny holes, and really good at hiding from animals that want to eat them. So having to get away from their predators in the sea has made them evolve into amazing creatures.
He describes the octopus as fast, clever, good at hiding, and amazing. When we are describing someone or something, it's a good idea to make a list of headings to help organise the description. We can talk about intellect. A person might be clever, wise, bright, smart, foolish, or even stupid. We can also talk about a person's attitudes towards life. We could say a person is sensible, introverted, extroverted, optimistic, or pessimistic. Or we might talk about their attitudes to people. Are they polite, generous and kind, or are they impolite, greedy and mean? And we can describe someone's behaviour too. Are they positive, interesting and confident? Or are they negative, boring and shy? When learning to describe people, it's a good idea to be familiar with opposites like these. This will help you build your vocabulary very quickly. Do you know the opposites of these words? Cruel, extroverted, courteous, generous, bright. The opposites are kind, introverted, rude, selfish, and stupid. Sometimes it sounds better to use one of the more positive words to describe someone. Mary was really cruel. You could say, Mary was not very kind. I think Kylie is rude. I think Kylie is not always polite. Now let's work on building up your vocabulary about body parts. We'll begin by listening to the clip again. Listen for words that describe the body parts of the octopus.
They've got such a weird shape. They've got 8 arms coming off their mouth. When they walk around, it's like they're running round on super lips. They've got a head in the middle of their body. They've got a donut-shaped brain. They've got 3 hearts, blue blood and jet propulsion. And they've got a bag on the back that they stick all the body bits in.
He uses the words mouth, arms, lips, head, body, brain, heart, blood and back. These all refer to parts of the body that you might want to describe, so it's important to know them. The easiest way to remember large families of words like these is to have a system. You should organise the words by association. For example, you could begin with the face and remember all the words that relate to the face: eyes, mouth, nose. Then you could work on the body and all the words that go with it: spine, blood, bones. And then you can do this for the head, the legs, the arms. Rhymes can also be helpful when you're trying to remember new words. A rhyme that Australian children learn in school is head and shoulders, knees and toes, eyes, ears, mouth and nose. Or maybe you could try to find words with similar sounds and group them together. Practicing them can also help with pronunciation. Some good examples are ch words, chest, chin and cheek, or K sounds, ankle, skull, back and knuckle. Or words that start with H: head, hip, heel, hand, heart. In this way, you'll be able to practice body parts and pronunciation at the same time. And make sure you learn the more unusual body parts as well. And that's all for today. Don't forget to practice all the things we've learned today, and I'll see you next time. I'm Margot Politis. Today we're going to look at intonation, how we use a rising or falling tone of voice to convey meaning. And we'll also have a quick look at how to use commas. But first, let's watch a clip about sleep. We'll see a researcher doing some tests on a subject to see just what the benefits are of an afternoon nap.
Researchers at Flinders University say a short sleep in the mid-afternoon could actually increase a worker's productivity. Each subject performed a series of tests before and after their mid-afternoon sleep.
Some subjective tests of alertness, fatigue, vigour, and also some cognitive performance tasks, some which are pencil and paper and some that are done on the computer, and also an objective measure of alertness, which is how long it takes someone to fall asleep. So if it takes them a long time to fall asleep, that would suggest that they're quite alert, and a short time to fall asleep would mean that they're quite sleepy. Do you think you were asleep?
Yes, hard to tell, but I think so. Okay. I think I did for a bit.
For how long?
Felt like probably a couple of minutes, I reckon. Yeah.
I want you to do exactly the same thing now. So I want you to start here. So I want you to go as quickly and accurately as you can until I tell you to stop.
All right.
So in that clip, we heard a researcher talking to the subject of her tests. You'll notice her intonation changed a lot. Intonation refers to the changes in pitch in our voice as we speak, whether our voices go up or down. Intonation is very important to learn. It has many functions in a language. It conveys emotion. We can tell immediately listening to someone how they feel. Someone can sound happy or sound sad. Hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? Intonation also conveys meaning. It lets the listener know whether something is a question or a statement, or it can indicate different levels of certainty or uncertainty. Hello, are you well? Hello, are you well? Learning intonation is especially helpful for learning to ask questions and indicating what sort of answer we expect. Watch part of the clip again and listen closely to the intonation as the doctor talks to her subject. Do you think you were asleep?
Yes, hard to tell, but I think so. Okay. I think I did for a bit.
For how long?
Felt like probably a couple of minutes, I reckon.
The doctor says to the subject, do you think you were asleep? Does this have a rising or falling tone? Listen again. Do you think you were asleep? Do you think you were asleep? Her voice goes up at the end of the sentence. We call this a rising tone. The rising tone is used for yes-no questions, questions that need a yes or a no answer. Listen now to the second question. Does it have a rising or falling tone? For how long?
Felt like probably a couple of minutes, I reckon.
The doctor says, for how long? This is a question too, but it has a falling tone. A falling tone is used with information questions. They're questions that need information as an answer, not just a yes or no answer. The man answers with a statement. A couple of minutes, I reckon. This takes a falling tone. In English, statements usually end in a falling tone. The falling tone at the end tells the listener that the statement is finished. Listen to the intonation used to give instructions. So I want you to start here. So I want you to go as quickly and accurately as you can until I tell you to stop. Did you hear the falling tone at the end? She said, until I tell you to stop. This tells the listener that this is the end of the instruction. So let's look at when to use rising and falling tones again. A rising tone is used at the end of yes-no questions and a falling tone at the end of information questions. Falling intonation is also used with statements. These are very general rules, but they can help you to work out what you as a listener are expected to say and can help you as a speaker to convey your meaning. Now let's look at one last example of intonation. Listen to what happens when we have a list in a sentence. Here's a very complicated list. Some subjective tests of alertness, fatigue, vigour, and also some cognitive performance tasks, some which are pencil and paper and some that are done on the computer, and also an objective measure of alertness, which is how long it takes someone to fall asleep. So she uses a variety of intonation. She uses rising and falling tones, and a tone that's neither rising nor falling, just a flat tone for the items in the list. This tells the listener that she hasn't finished her list of tests. And then, for the very last item in the list, how long it takes someone to fall asleep. She uses falling intonation. This is how we know the list is finished. We generally use falling intonation for the last item in a list. So you can see there are some rules for intonation, but of course it varies according to the situation and our attitudes to the topic. Okay, so when we're talking, we use intonation, pauses and body language to convey meaning. But what about when we're writing? Well, we need to use punctuation. Let's start with one of the most common but difficult punctuation items, the comma. Commas are used to help readers understand the exact meaning of a sentence. They're like pauses in speech. A comma in the wrong place can give the wrong meaning to a sentence. For example, look at these two sentences. Stop, Jane. Stop, Jane. In the first sentence, the comma shows where there is a pause in speech. Stop, comma, Jane. And this tells us that the speaker wants Jane to stop. In the second sentence, there is no pause and no comma. Stop, Jane. With no pause, we know that the speaker is telling someone else to stop Jane. Let's look at some rules about using the comma. First, commas are used to separate items in a list. Look at the way commas are used here.
Some subjective tests of alertness, fatigue, vigour, and also some cognitive performance tasks.
Okay, so notice that when we write down her speech, we put commas where she uses pauses, and we use intonation to separate the items in a list. We write alertness, comma, fatigue, comma, vigour. We read this as alertness, fatigue, vigour. Adding a comma between items in a list tells us clearly how many different items there are. A second use of commas is to separate clauses in a sentence. We use a comma to separate dependent and independent clauses, but only when the dependent clause is first in the sentence. This sounds complicated, but it's not really. Here's an example of a dependent clause, because he was very tired, followed by an independent clause, he went to bed. Notice that we use a comma. Because he was very tired, comma, he went to bed. But let's swap the clauses around. He went to bed because he was very tired. In sentences like this, with the independent clause first, we don't need a comma. Listen to the different way they read out, and you can hear why. Because he was very tired, he went to bed. Notice the pause. He went to bed because he was very tired. There's no pause. So sometimes when you're writing, it helps to think that if there's a pause, you might need a comma. And that's where we're going to pause today. Hope you enjoyed Study English. I'll see you next time. I'm Margot Politis. Today we're going to talk about simple present tense, definitions, and technical vocabulary. All the things you need to know and use to write a report. First, we'll listen to someone talking about copyright, the rights people have to their own work. It's structured like a simple information report.
Copyright's a passion of mine. Copyright is the exclusive bundle of rights which is awarded to the author or a creator of work to entitle them to market it, to get economic reward for their creative endeavour, and to entitle them to say when, how, and on what conditions their work may be used. Once I put my book on the internet, anybody can access it at the push of a button or a click of a mouse. Anybody can download it, copy it, and transmit it without my knowledge, without my consent, 100 times over to every country in the world without me knowing. There is a misconception about work which is submitted to the internet, and it's that if you've given it to the internet, it's gone to a public domain, therefore anyone can use it, as they will, when they will. And that is a very seriously ill-founded misconception. The fact that you submit work to the internet does not affect your legal rights in relation to that work.
Okay, so we heard Celine McInerney present an information report. An information report presents information about a subject. Its purpose is to classify and describe a subject using a range of facts. The subject is usually a general topic or area rather than a specific person or place. For example, the general subject of today's information report is copyright. But whatever the subject, there are a few common features that all information reports have. You might notice that the report is in the simple present tense. Listen again.
Once I put my book on the internet, anybody can access it at the push of a button or a click of a mouse. Anybody can download it, copy it, and transmit it without my knowledge, without my consent, 100 times over to every country in the world without me knowing.
The simple present tense is used in information reports to describe qualities and features of the subject. This is one of the key features of an information report. Let's look at some other key features. Information reports often begin with an opening statement that introduces the subject. This is the topic sentence. Listen to Celine's first sentence.
Copyright's a passion of mine.
She uses the simple present tense to introduce the subject of the report. Copyright's a passion of mine. Copyright is a passion of mine. It's in this topic sentence that we learn what the subject of the report is, what the text is about. This is also called an orientation. What comes after the orientation?
Copyright is the exclusive bundle of rights which is awarded to the author or a creator of work to entitle them to market it, to get economic reward for their creative endeavour, and to entitle them to say when, how, and on what conditions their work may be used.
The next step in creating an information report is to give an explanation or a definition of the topic. So Celine begins by telling us what copyright is. She needs to explain what copyright is so that she can go on to talk in more detail about it. The definition will be followed by a short description. In this case, she goes on to give a description of the topic copyright and the internet.
There is a misconception about work which is submitted to the internet, and it's that if you've given it to the internet, it's gone to a public domain, therefore anyone can use it, as they will, when they will. And that is a very seriously ill-founded misconception. The fact that you submit work to the internet does not affect your legal rights in relation to that work.
So let's go back over the main features of an information report. It's written in the simple present tense. It has an opening statement to introduce the subject. It then gives an explanation or definition of the subject. This is followed by a short description of the subject. You should always follow this pattern when presenting any type of information report. Reading or listening to any text is a good opportunity to extend your vocabulary. In this text, there are a lot of technical words related to the topic of copyright. Let's review some of the words connected with this topic. When talking about copyright, the speaker uses the following nouns: copyright, author, conditions, work, book, internet, knowledge, consent. She also uses a number of noun phrases: bundle of rights, creator of work, economic reward, creative endeavour, public domain, and legal rights. And she uses these verbs: awarded, entitle, market, access, download, copy, transmit. To understand all the information in this report, you'll need to know all of these words and phrases, or be able to work them out from the context. Listen to the full clip again to see where and how these words are used.
Copyright's a passion of mine. Copyright is the exclusive bundle of rights which is awarded to the author or a creator of work to entitle them to market it, to get economic reward for their creative endeavour, and to entitle them to say when, how, and on what conditions their work may be used. Once I put my book on the internet, anybody can access it at the push of a button or a click of a mouse. Anybody can download it, copy it, and transmit it without my knowledge, without my consent, 100 times over to every country in the world without me knowing. There is a misconception about work which is submitted to the internet, and it's that if you've given it to the internet, it's gone to a public domain, therefore anyone can use it, as they will, when they will. And that is a very seriously ill-founded misconception. The fact that you submit work to the internet does not affect your legal rights in relation to that work.
Okay, notice that she used the verb submit and its past tense form submitted. We're going to finish today with some pronunciation practice on words that end in ed like this. Regular past tense verbs end in ed, but there are 3 different pronunciations. After consonants t and d, ed is pronounced ed. For example, awarded or submitted. After voiceless consonants p, s, k, f, sh, ch or th, the final ed is pronounced t. For example, tip and tipped. But after voiced consonants b, g, j, o, z, v, z, and plus all vowel and diphthong sounds, the final ed is pronounced d. For example, we have fill and filled. Here are some more examples. Measure becomes measured. Direct, directed. Dip, dipped. Pick, picked. Drain, drained. And use becomes used. Now let's test you. Do you know how to pronounce each of these? Omitted. Walked. Arrived. Calculated. Stopped. Washed. A good way to learn these sorts of endings and pronunciations is to practice reading whole paragraphs. This will give you a feeling for the rhythm of the words. Try this one. I overslept and missed my train. I slipped on the road in the pouring rain. I sprained my ankle, skinned my knees, shattered my glasses and lost my keys. And you can practice that one at home. That's all for Study English today. Today we're going to look at classification, how things are sorted into classes or groups. We'll listen to an archaeologist talking about artefacts, things left behind from the past, and what sorts of groups they belong to. And we'll finish by doing some pronunciation practice on final S sounds.
Well, these are all artefacts from the cesspits at Castleton Place, and there's a real assortment of different types. Some of the artefacts we've got relate to, I guess, the leisure time activity, that the pastimes that people might have had. There are some gaming tokens. This is a lead disc with a horse figurine on it as well. It would have been used as some sort of betting token. The dice there, the bone dice as well. There's a couple of dominoes. One's made out of bone, one we think's made out of slate. Some of the other pieces, we've got a lead rifle that would have been a part of a child's toy soldier set. Yeah, these bones, again, from the cesspits of Castleton, and quite clearly it's been cut. These aren't natural breaks at all. Right. These are what we refer to as butchering marks. So we're not just learning what sort of animals were being eaten at Castleton, we're also learning about the cuts of meat that were being provided, whether it's been done locally by the individual house owners or whether they're going to a local butcher. I think the artefacts from Castleton Place and the other results of the archaeological process are important because they give us a really rare insight into the way Melbourne operated in its early years.
The speaker, Jeremy Smith, is discussing the artefacts he's found in Melbourne. Let's look at how he classifies or sorts out these artefacts for us. First, the opening statement tells us what is being classified. This is an orientation. Then the things are classified according to certain criteria. They're put into groups. Finally, at the end of the classification, there's a summary or a comment on the groups and their significance. Let's listen to Jeremy's opening statement or orientation.
Well, these are all artefacts from the cesspits at Castleton Place, and there's a real assortment of different types.
So the topic of this classification is the artefacts from Castleton Place. We are told that there is a real assortment of different types. From this opening statement, we would expect the rest of the passage to be about the different types of artefacts found there. And that's exactly what's given. Listen to how the first type is introduced.
Some of the artefacts we've got relate to, I guess, the leisure time activity, that the pastimes that people might have had.
The first category is of artefacts relating to leisure time activity or pastimes. This is the first group or class of the classification. To make this clearer to the reader or listener, he could have used signals to show this was the first category. He could have said, firstly, we have artefacts that relate to leisure time activities. What's the next group?
Some of the other pieces, we've got a lead rifle that would have been a part of a child's toy soldier set.
So the second category is children's toys. Again, he could have introduced this by saying second or secondly. Secondly, we have children's toys. And what about the third or final category?
Yeah, these bones, again, from the cesspits of Castleton, and quite clearly it's been cut.
The third category is to do with bones, evidence of what people ate. So thirdly, we have bones. So after describing the different classes or groups, Jeremy summarises by saying why the artefacts are important.
I think the artefacts from Castleton Place and the other results of the archaeological process are important because they give us a really rare insight into the way Melbourne operated in its early years.
This is a summary statement. He finishes by giving a comment on the importance of the classification. Here, he is saying the artefacts are important because of the rare insights they give us. They show what life was like in Melbourne many years ago. Okay, and now to something completely different, the pronunciation of the letter S at the end of words. But first, let's look at when you'll find an S on the end of words. Well, firstly, there's the natural S. Some words always end with an S. Secondly, the letter S is added to plural nouns. Thirdly, it's added to third-person singular verbs in the present tense. And finally, it's added to the possessive pronoun it and possessive nouns. Okay, so there are lots of times when you'll see an S on the end of words. For words where it's added on, it has 3 different pronunciations. Let's classify them. The first pronunciation of the final S is uz. It's pronounced this way after sounds such as s, z, sh, ch and j. Listen for an example in the passage.
Some of the other pieces, we've got a lead rifle that would have been a part of a child's toy soldier set.
Did you hear it? The example was pieces. Pieces. The S on the end is pronounced z because it followed an S sound. Other examples are buzzers, wishes, churches, judges. The second way S is pronounced at the end of a word is s. It's pronounced this way after voiceless consonants. P, t, k, f and f. Some examples from the text are artefacts, types, breaks, marks and cuts. The rest of the time, that is after voiced consonants such as b, d, g, u, v, v, n, and after vowels and diphthongs, the final S is pronounced z. Examples from the text are there's, pastimes, tokens, dominoes, childs, bones, animals, years. Now listen to the clip again and try to hear the difference between these final S sounds.
Yeah, these bones, again, from the cesspits of Castleton, and quite clearly it's been cut. These aren't natural breaks at all. Right. These are what we refer to as butchering marks.
Its is a word that even native English speakers have a lot of trouble with. Its can be written without an apostrophe and with an apostrophe. But what's the difference? Well, with an apostrophe, its is a contraction of it is or it has. Without an apostrophe, its is a possessive pronoun. The other possessive pronouns are my, your, his, her, our, and their. These are used to show possession. For example, is that your dog? What is its name? Remember that possessive pronouns never have an S added to them, but possessive nouns do. Is that Simon's dog? Apostrophes can often cause trouble for English language learners. They're used with contractions and with possessives. Don't ever use an apostrophe to make nouns plural. There are many students at school. Not, there are many students at school. And don't confuse the contraction of a noun and is with the possessive form of the noun. They look the same, but they mean very different things. Mary's dog is ill means the dog that belongs to Mary is ill. Mary's ill today means Mary is ill. Here, Mary's is a contraction of Mary is. Okay, now let's listen to one last clip, then we'll see if you can add some apostrophes.
Some of the other pieces, we've got a lead rifle that would have been a part of a child's toy soldier set.
He says, some of the other pieces we've got are a lead rifle that would have been part of a child's toy soldier set. We've is a contraction of we have, so that needs an apostrophe. Would've is a contraction of would have, so that needs one too. And the last one? A child's toy soldier set. The toy soldier set belongs to the child. It's a possessive S, so that needs an apostrophe too. And don't forget to practice your pronunciation and punctuation at home whenever you can. You'll get the hang of it quickly, I'm sure. And thanks for joining me for Study English, IELTS preparation.